They sat around my dinner table and voted. Not about vacation plans, not about what to cook for Sunday dinner. They voted on whether my 7-year-old daughter should give up her bedroom, my daughter, her room, the room with the purple curtains she picked out herself, the room where she kept her stuffed animals in a row along the windowsill. They raised their hands like it was a city council meeting, and my husband counted the votes out loud, nodding like the result was reasonable. Like I was supposed to smile and go wake her up and tell her she was moving to the basement storage room because the family had decided. I sat there holding my fork above my plate, and I remember thinking, they do not know, they have never known, and I had never once told them. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something real. If the people who were supposed to love your child looked her in the face and voted her out of her own room, what would you do? Would you argue right there at the table? Would you pack your bags that same night? Or would you do what Eva did, go very quiet, say almost nothing, and let them keep building the trap they were standing in? Drop your answer in the comments. Because the choice Eva made that night is the reason this story ends the way it does. My name is Eva, and I want to start by telling you about the table. It was a round dining table that I had owned for 11 years. I bought it at an estate sale 3 months before I ever met my husband. It was solid oak, a little scratched on one side, and I loved it because it was big enough to seat 8 people, and because when I ran my hand along the edge, it felt permanent. It felt like something that would last. I did not know then that the table would one day be the setting for one of the most humiliating moments of my life. I did not know it would also be the place where I made the quietest, most powerful decision I have ever made. I need to go back a little before I go forward. Not too far, just far enough for you to understand what kind of person I was before that night and what kind of woman I became after it. I grew up in a small house with my grandmother. My parents left when I was 4, not all at once, not dramatically, just gradually, until one day I noticed they were simply not there anymore. My grandmother, who everyone called Nana Bess, was small and sharp and made the best oatmeal in the world. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood, and she never once complained about it in front of me. When I was 9, she sat me down and said something I carried with me for the rest of my life. She said, Eva, the most dangerous thing a woman can do is let other people decide what she deserves. She said it simply, like she was telling me the weather. I nodded and did not fully understand it yet. Nana Bess passed away when I was 26. She left me everything she had, which was not a lot by most measures, but was everything to me. Her savings, her car, and the house. The house was the thing. It was a 4-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood, not fancy but solid. Good bones, the real estate people always say. Nana Bess had paid it off entirely by the time she was 62. She had no mortgage, no debt, and no interest in ever selling it. When she died, the house came to me with a clear title and no conditions. I was the owner, full stop. I did not tell many people about the house, not because I was secretive by nature, but because it never seemed like the most important thing to lead with when meeting someone. It was just where I lived. It was home. I paid the property taxes, I handled the insurance, I made the small repairs that houses always need. I kept the documents in a fireproof box on the top shelf of my bedroom closet, and I moved through my life. I met Daniel 2 years after Nana Bess passed. Daniel was charming in the specific way that takes time to decode. He was attentive at first. He remembered small things, my coffee order, the name of my childhood cat, the fact that I hated the smell of artificial vanilla. He was funny in a dry, understated way. He had dark eyes and a calm voice, and he made me feel, for the first time in a long time, like I was not carrying everything alone. We dated for 2 years, we got engaged. We married in a small ceremony in the backyard of the very house Nana Bess left me. His family came. His mother Margaret sat in the front row in a pale yellow dress and gave a toast at the reception that was mostly about Daniel, about how wonderful he was, how much he had achieved, how lucky whoever married him would be. She mentioned me by name once. I told myself she was nervous. I told myself I was reading too much into it. I was not reading too much into it. Daniel moved into the house after we married. He never asked whose house it was. I never volunteered the information in those early months. It was just the house, our house, he started saying, our home, and because I loved him and I was happy, and I wanted him to feel like it was his home too, I let that language settle without correcting it. That was the first mistake. We had our daughter, Lily, when I was 31. Lily came into the world at 6:40 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, and she was the most awake-looking newborn I had ever seen. She looked directly at my face from the very first moment, and I felt something shift inside me that has never shifted back. We put her in the second bedroom, the one that got the morning light, and when she was old enough to choose her own things, she chose purple curtains and a white bookshelf and a small rug shaped like a sun. She kept 7 stuffed animals on the windowsill in a specific order that she knew by memory. Her room was hers in a way that rooms can only be when a child has truly claimed them. Life with Daniel was not always bad. I want to be honest about that because easy stories where the husband is a monster from day one are not usually true stories. Daniel was good at some things. He was a decent father when he was present. He could cook one perfect meal, a pasta dish with tomatoes and basil, and he made it every Friday. He told good stories. He was fun at parties. He was also very close to his family in a way that I slowly began to understand was not closeness but dependency, and not just his dependency on them but theirs on him in a way that required him to keep performing for their approval. His mother Margaret had opinions about everything. His sister Renee had opinions about everything. His brother Carl had opinions about everything and the confidence of a man who had never been told he was wrong. They were a loud, opinionated family who loved each other in a way that also involved constant judgment, comparison, and the quiet ranking of everyone around them. And I, as Daniel's wife, was always somehow near the bottom of that ranking. It was small at first, a comment from Margaret about how I cooked the chicken too dry, a remark from Renee about how my living room looked dated, a suggestion from Carl that I should think about going back to work full-time since Daniel was carrying so much. I had a job. I worked from home as a medical billing consultant and I made more money than Daniel most years, but Carl did not know that and Daniel never corrected him. I noticed that Daniel never corrected any of them about anything when it came to me. I brought it up once. I said, it would help if you backed me up sometimes when they say things. Daniel looked at me with an expression that I would come to recognize over the years, a kind of gentle bafflement, like I was speaking a language he was choosing not to translate. He said, "They don't mean anything by it, Eva. They're just being themselves." I nodded. I moved on. I made a note somewhere deep in myself and kept moving. We were about 5 years into the marriage when things started to shift in ways I could feel but not yet name. Daniel's hours at work changed. He started coming home later, not dramatically late, not suspicious late at first, just later. He started taking his phone to the bathroom. He started laughing at things I couldn't see the screen of. He started being kinder to me in ways that felt performed, like he was making deposits to offset something I didn't know about yet. He bought me flowers twice in 1 month when he had never been a flower-buying person. He offered to do the dishes without being asked. He asked how my day was in a tone that suggested he needed me to say fine. I noticed all of it. I did not say anything yet. I am not someone who makes accusations without proof. Nana Bess taught me that too. She said, "Eva, if you're going to name a thing, make sure you can point to it." I started paying attention more carefully. It was a Tuesday in March when I found the first real thing. I was cleaning out the car, which I did every few months, and I found a receipt in the glove box. It was from a restaurant I had never been to, dated on a night Daniel said he worked late. The receipt was for 2 people: appetizers, 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, 2 desserts, the kind of dinner you order when you want to impress someone, the kind of dinner Daniel had never once ordered for me. I put the receipt in my pocket. I took a picture of it first. Then I folded it and put it in the pocket of my winter coat, and I went back inside and I made dinner and I watched Daniel come home and kiss me on the cheek and say something smelled good, and I did not say a single word about what I had found. I needed more. Over the next 6 weeks, I found more. A name in his phone that was saved just as an initial, K messages I glimpsed once that were more than friendly. A hotel points notification on his email that he forgot to close before leaving the room. A second receipt, same restaurant, different night. I was not hysterical, I was not panicking, I was something colder and more focused than panic. I was building a picture and I wanted the picture to be complete before I moved. Here is what is important to understand about that time. While I was quietly collecting proof, while I was processing a grief that I could not yet let myself fully feel, Daniel's family was becoming more present in our home. His mother Margaret started coming over more. His sister Renee started having opinions about our decor that crossed the line from comment to instruction. Carl started giving Daniel advice about the house, about renovations, about which bedroom would make a better guest room, about Lily's bedroom. The first time it came up was at a Sunday lunch. Margaret said, almost as an aside, that it was a shame the guest room was so small. She said that when family came to visit, it was uncomfortable. She said that room at the end of the hall is so much more suitable. The one with the big window. I looked at her. I looked at Daniel. I waited. Daniel said, "Yeah, that's a good point. That room does get good light." That room was Lily's room. Lily was sitting at the table eating her bread and did not understand what was being discussed above her head, but I understood. I said very calmly, "That's Lily's room." Margaret smiled at me with the patience of someone who has decided you are not very bright. She said, "Of course, I only meant eventually, when she grows up." Lily was 6 years old. I said nothing more. I filed it away. But it did not go away. Over the next several months, it kept coming back in different forms from different people. Renee mentioned that the end bedroom would make a beautiful home office for Daniel. Carl said that guest rooms matter for a family's social life, as if I were running a bed and breakfast. And Daniel each time made soft agreeing sounds without ever once looking at me to say, "That's our daughter's room and this conversation is over." I kept watching. I kept building my picture. I kept being Eva who brought the snacks and cleared the table and smiled at the right moments and said nothing that cost me anything yet. And then came the night of the votes. It was a Saturday in September. Daniel's entire family came for dinner. Margaret, Renee, Carl, Carl's wife Patris, and Daniel's cousin Tommy, who came along without being invited but who no one questioned because no one in that family questioned anything Carl did. 7 adults, 2 children counting Lily, around my oak table that I had bought at an estate sale 11 years before I ever knew any of their names. I had made a full dinner: roasted chicken, which I had perfected specifically to prove to Margaret that it was not dry, roasted vegetables, a salad, 2 kinds of bread, and a pie that had taken me an hour and a half. I want you to understand that I fed these people generously from my kitchen in my house. After the pie, after the coffee, after the easy conversation about whatever the easy conversation was about, Daniel cleared his throat and said he wanted to talk about something. He said it had been on their minds for a while. He said the house needed some reorganizing. He said that Margaret would be coming to stay more regularly now that she was getting older and needed some support, and they had been thinking about the room situation. I put down my coffee cups. Daniel said that Lily's room was really the best option for a proper guest room. He said it got the most light, it was the biggest secondary bedroom, and it had its own closet. He said that Lily could move into the smaller room down the hall, the one currently used for storage. He said they would clean it out and make it nice for her. He said Lily would be fine, kids are adaptable. He was talking about my daughter like she was furniture to be rearranged. I looked around the table, Margaret was nodding, Renee was nodding, Carl was already talking logistics, Patris was quiet looking at the table, Tommy was finishing his pie. And then Daniel said, let's just take a quick vote, just so everyone is on board. He said this with the easy confidence of a man who believed the house he lived in was his to make decisions about. They raised their hands, Margaret, Renee, Carl, Tommy, 4 hands, Daniel's hand 5, and he looked at me and said, I think that settles it. I looked at him, I looked at all of them, and I said quite quietly that it was an interesting vote, and then I said I'd like to speak with Daniel privately for a moment. Margaret looked almost amused, like I was about to throw a small tantrum that they would politely endure. They moved to the living room, I stayed at the table. Daniel sat back down across from me. And I said, Daniel, who owns this house? He blinked, he said, what? I said it again slowly, who owns this house? He said, we do, we both do. I said, no, tell me who owns this house, what name is on the deed? And I watched his face do something I had never quite seen it do before. A small uncertainty appeared behind his eyes, because somewhere in the back of his memory, he knew he had never actual. Why checked? He had moved in. He had started saying our house. He had never asked, and I had never volunteered, and somewhere along the way, he had simply decided the answer without verifying it. I told him, I said, my name is on the deed, Daniel, my name only. This house belonged to my grandmother and she left it to me and I have never added your name to it. This is my house. And no one in that living room has any standing to vote on what happens inside it. The silence between us was very loud. He said, that can't be right. I said, the documents are in my closet in a fireproof box. You are welcome to look at them. I watched him try to find a different explanation. I watched him try to locate a memory of signing papers, of being part of a title transfer, of something that would make him co-owner of the ground he was sitting on. He could not find that memory because it did not exist. He said, Eva, I don't understand. I said, I know you don't, that's actually been one of the problems. I stood up, I went to the living room. I told Daniel's family calmly and without drama that the room situation was not going to change, that Lily's room was Lily's room, and that was the end of the discussion. I said it with the voice I use when something is simply true and requires no argument. Margaret started to say something and I looked at her in a way that was not hostile but was very clear. She stopped. They left shortly after, the goodbyes were stiff, I did not apologize for making them stiff. But that was not even the end of what I had to deal with that night. Because after they left, after Lily was in bed in her purple curtained room with her 7 stuffed animals exactly where she had left them, Daniel came and found me in the kitchen. And what he said next was the thing that made me understand that the house was only part of the problem. He said, why didn't you ever tell me? I said, why didn't you ever ask? He said, that's not fair. I said, Daniel, you let your family vote to take a room from your 7-year-old daughter in a house where you had never verified your own standing. You did not check, you did not ask, you assumed. You have been assuming things about this marriage for a long time. He said, what is that supposed to mean? I looked at him, and this was the moment I had been building toward for 6 weeks of receipts and screenshots and careful, quiet watching. I said, I know about Kay. The color changed in his face. I had not planned to say it that night. I had planned to wait until my documentation was more organized, until I had spoken to someone about my options. But the vote had moved something in me. The image of his hand raised in the air to relocate my child had moved something loose that I could not put back. I said, I am not going to have that conversation tonight. I am going to go to bed. And tomorrow, you're going to stay somewhere else while I figure out what I want to do. He said, Eva. I said tomorrow, not tonight. I went to bed, he slept on the couch. In the morning, he left for his brother's house, and Lily asked where Daddy was, and I told her Daddy was visiting Uncle Carl for a little while. She said okay and went back to her cereal. I sat at my oak table alone for the first time in years, and I felt something that surprised me. I felt almost calm. Let me tell you what I did in the weeks that followed, because this is where the story turns from pain into something else. I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she had been practicing family law for 22 years, and she wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and she did not waste words. I brought her my documents, the house title in my name alone, my financial records, my income history, a list of the joint accounts we shared. She looked at everything for about 45 minutes, and then she looked at me over her reading glasses and she said, "You're in a stronger position than most people who walk through my door." I told her about Kay, I told her about the receipts and the hotel points notification and the messages I had photographed. She told me what I needed to do next. I did all of it. I opened a separate bank account. I had been the one managing our household finances for most of the marriage, which meant I had access to the records, and I made sure my financial documentation was clean and organized. I did not take money that was not mine. I did not close accounts or drain anything. I simply separated what was mine and made it organized and protected. I also did something that felt small but mattered. I had the locks on the house rekeyed. Not to be cruel, not to lock Daniel out permanently right away, but to make sure that I controlled who came and went from my house during a time when his family had very recently demonstrated that they believed they had authority over my space. Patricia said this was within my rights as the sole owner. I did it on a Wednesday morning while Lily was at school. I also started writing things down. And not because I planned to go to court over every grievance, but because I had spent years letting things pass without naming them, and I needed to name them at least to myself. The comments from Margaret, the way Daniel never corrected them, the vote, the years of soft erasure that I had been too patient to confront. I wrote it all in a notebook with a blue cover, and I kept it on my desk next to my work computer. Daniel called every day. At first, the calls were a mix of defensiveness and pleading. He said I was overreacting. He said the house thing was a misunderstanding. He said Kay was not what I thought. He said that. He actually said that. When I told him I had receipts with dates and locations, he went quiet. When I told him I had a screenshot of a notification that was enough to tell me exactly what kind of knot, what you think it was, he stopped saying it was a misunderstanding. He asked if we could go to couples counseling. I said, Daniel, I am not against that. But I need you to understand that my deciding whether to continue this marriage is not dependent on whether counseling goes well. I am going to decide what is right for me and for Lily based on what I know and how things have been, not based on what a counselor can fix in 12 sessions. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "You've changed." I said, "I've clarified." Here's something I want to say directly about that period, because I think people sometimes misunderstand what quiet strength looks like from the outside. I was not cold. I was not performing strength I did not feel. There were nights I cried. There were mornings I woke up and felt the specific grief of realizing that the life I thought I was building with someone was built on a foundation that had been crumbling without my knowledge. There were times I sat on the floor of my closet and held the fireproof box and felt the absurdity of it all, that a box of documents was more solid than the marriage it sat beside. But I did not make decisions from that crying place. I let myself feel it, and then I went back to the table and did the next thing. That was what Nana Bess showed me, not to be hard, not to stop feeling, but to not let feelings stop me. Margaret called me 2 weeks after the dinner. I was not surprised. She was too strategic to stay silent for long. She said she wanted to apologize. She said things had gotten out of hand at dinner. She said she hoped I understood that they only wanted what was best for the family. She said that Daniel had told her things were difficult right now, and she wanted me to know she was there for me. I let her talk. Then I said, Margaret, I appreciate you calling. I want to be honest with you. The vote at dinner was not a misunderstanding. It was a moment that showed me something clearly about how your family sees my daughter and me in this home. I am not angry, but I am not going to pretend it didn't happen or that it didn't tell me something important. She said I never meant for Lily to feel unwelcome. I said I believe you didn't intend that, but intentions don't always match impact. And I want you to know that whatever happens between Daniel and me, I will always make sure Lily feels at home, because this is her home. It is her home in a way that no vote can change. Margaret said goodbye shortly after. Her voice was smaller than it had been. I went back to work. 3 weeks after the dinner, Renee texted me. She said she heard things were rough and she just wanted to reach out as a sister. I noticed she did not say sister-in-law, just sister, as though intimacy I had not been offered during the good years was now being offered during the difficult ones because it was useful. I replied, "Thanks for reaching out, Renee. I'm handling things." That was the whole conversation. Carl sent Daniel a long voice message, which Daniel played on speakerphone while standing in our kitchen during one of his return visits to collect more of his things. Carl's voice filled the room, confident and instructional, telling Daniel that he needed to get this straightened out, that the house situation was complicated, that he should really look into his rights as a long-term occupant. I listened to approximately 45 seconds of this before I walked into the kitchen, looked at Daniel directly, and said, "You should know that your brother's advice about occupant rights is legally incorrect." Daniel looked up. I said, "I have spoken to a lawyer. You are welcome to do the same, but I want to save both of us time by telling you that I know my position." He turned off the voice message. We were not always like that. There were moments during those weeks when the old version of us surfaced briefly. When he stayed for dinner one night because Lily asked him to, and the three of us sat at the table and she talked nonstop about her school project on butterflies and Daniel laughed at something she said, and for a moment the table felt the way it used to. I held on to that NT and then I let it go, because one warm evening does not fix what has been broken, and I had learned by then not to mistake a warm moment for a changed pattern. The lawyer conversation continued to move forward. Daniel had gotten his own attorney, a younger man who had apparently told him that his claim to the property as a long-term occupant and spouse was strong. I was told this secondhand through Daniel's confused description of the advice. My lawyer Patricia heard this and did not change her expression. She said, "Well, let's see what they say when they see the title." What they said when they saw the title was significantly less confident. Because the house was in my name alone, there had never been a quitclaim deed adding Daniel. There had never been a co-ownership transfer. He had contributed to household expenses, yes. He had paid what amounted to a below-market rate of living costs for 6 years of our marriage in a house he had never verified he owned. His attorney's confident claim evaporated into a much quieter conversation about equitable considerations, which Patricia addressed methodically, and I will not bore you with the legal detail except to say, the house was mine. It remained mine. But something happened around this time that I had not anticipated. Something outside the legal process, outside Daniel's family, something that came from an unexpected direction. Patris, Carl's wife, the one who had been quiet at the dinner table looking at her plate, called me. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. She said, "Eva, I want to tell you something." She sounded like a woman who had been deciding whether to make this call for several days. She said, "I have been in that family for 14 years, and I have watched things happen in that family for 14 years, and the night of the dinner when they did that vote, I felt sick. I want you to know that I did not raise my hand." I said, "I know, I noticed." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I want you to know something else, something I have known for a while." She paused. She said, "The woman Daniel has been seeing, Kay, she is someone I have seen him with twice at family events. The last time was at Carl's birthday dinner 8 months ago. Carl knew, Carl has known." I sat down. She said, "I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I told myself it was not my place. But after that night, after watching them vote to move your daughter out of her room in your own house, I felt like staying silent was making me part of something I don't want to be part of." I said, "Patris, thank you, I mean that." She said, "I don't know if it helps. I just needed you to know you weren't imagining things and you weren't alone." I held the phone for a long time after she hung up. The fact that Carl knew changed something, not in the legal picture, which was already clear, but in the personal picture. In the picture of who Daniel was in his family and how that family saw me. Because if Carl knew about Kay 8 months ago, which was months before the vote about the room, then the vote was not a family making a thoughtless suggestion. The vote was a family who knew the marriage was already compromised, already secretly being dismantled from one side, casually reorganizing a house they thought was about to change hands anyway. They voted to give Lily's room to a guest suite because they saw me as temporary. They saw my daughter as temporary. I sat with that for a night, a long still night. And then in the morning I got up and I did two things. The first thing I did was send Daniel a message. I said, "I know that Carl knew, I know for how long, I am not going to discuss this with you emotionally. I just want you to know that I know." The second thing I did was call Patricia and tell her to move forward. The divorce process is not something I will walk you through in detail because it was months of paperwork and negotiation and waiting and more waiting, and the legal texture of it belongs to me in a way I choose to keep private. What I will tell you is what mattered. The house stayed mine. The financial settlement reflected my actual financial contributions to the marriage, which my records supported clearly. I was awarded primary custody of Lily, which was not fought seriously because Daniel's attorney was pragmatic, and because Daniel, when he stopped performing confidence and started being honest with himself, acknowledged that Lily needed consistency, and I was the one who had provided it. Daniel moved out fully on a Thursday in November. He came with a truck and two friends, and he took what was his, which was not as much as he might have thought since most of what filled the house had been mine before he arrived. He took the television, some furniture, his kitchen equipment, his books. He left the oak table because I told him it was mine, and he looked at it for a moment and did not argue. He stood in the doorway of Lily's room for about 2 minutes and then came. Ian found me and said, "I'll be here for her." I said, "I know you will," and I meant it. The goodbye was not cinematic. There was no screaming, no throwing things, no final devastating speech. He left. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway and listened to the sound of his truck leaving, and then I went and sat at my oak table and drank a cup of tea and looked out the window at the backyard and thought about my grandmother. Nana Bess had known somehow what kind of world I would move through. She had tried to prepare me. She had built me a foundation, literally, and she had said, "Let no one tell you what you deserve." I had not always lived up to that. I had stayed too long in too many small silences. I had let things pass that should have been named. I had been so careful not to seem difficult that I had allowed things to become very difficult indeed. But I had never given the house away, and that was not by cunning design, not at first. It was simply that I knew something was mine, and I had not let the language of our life together quietly transfer what was legally and morally clear. And that one thing that when held line had protected the floor my daughter stood on. Lily's room stayed exactly as it was. Now I want to tell you about what happened after, because the story does not end with the truck pulling away. The story ends, or rather finds its resting place, in the months that followed. Margaret reached out again in January. She said she hoped we could find a way to keep a relationship for Lily's sake. I thought about that carefully. I wrote back and I said, "I agree that Lily's relationship with her father's family is important. I am willing to support that. But I want to be clear that my relationship with you and with the family has changed. I am not carrying resentment. But I am also not going to return to a dynamic where I was consistently the last person considered in a home I owned outright." I said it respectfully. I said it clearly. I sent it, and I felt the same thing I had been feeling more and more of, the lightness that comes when you stop carrying things you were never meant to be carrying. Renee never really reached out again. I was not surprised and I was not hurt. Carl was the one that surprised me most, though perhaps he shouldn't have. About 6 weeks after Daniel moved out, Carl called me directly, not Daniel, me. He said he had been doing some thinking. He said he owed me an apology. I waited. He said I should have told you about the situation with Daniel sooner. He said it plainly without decoration. He said I should have been honest and I wasn't, and that was wrong. I said, "Carl, I appreciate that. I do." I said, "I think you were trying to protect your brother. I understand that. But protecting someone from consequences of choices they're making is not the same as loyalty. It's just a delay." He was quiet for a second. He said, "Yeah, that's right." We did not become close. We are not warm in any ongoing way. But in that moment, I respected him more than I had in the 6 years I had known him, because he said a true thing simply and without making himself the victim of it. Patris and I still talk sometimes, not often, but sometimes. She is still married to Carl. She is still navigating that family. She texts me occasionally to ask how Lily is doing, and she always sends a card at Christmas. She is the person in that whole story who paid the highest personal cost to do the right thing at the right time, and I do not forget that. Daniel and I have found a co-parenting rhythm. It is not warm, it is not cold. It is functional and civil and child-focused. He is in Lily's life consistently. He was not a bad father, and I never told Lily otherwise. What happened between us belongs to us. Lily gets to have her father without the weight of what her parents went through. I am careful about that. Kay is not a part of this story that I will spend words on. She was a consequence of choices Daniel made, not a cause, and I have no interest in locating my anger at her. My anger, such as it was, lived where it belonged, in the patterns and choices and silences of a marriage that had quietly become something other than what I thought it was. That anger moved through me and mostly out of me over time. It did not live in me permanently. It was not interesting enough to keep. What I do want to tell you about is a morning in February, about 3 months after Daniel left. Lily had a school project. She had to draw and describe her bedroom for her class, and she worked on it at the kitchen table with her markers and her rulers and her very serious expression. She drew the window. She drew the 7 stuffed animals on the windowsill. She drew the sun rug and the bookshelf and the purple curtains, which in her drawing were more magenta than purple, but that was fine. She wrote her name at the top, and underneath she wrote "MY Room" in big uneven letters. She held it up to show me. I looked at that drawing or a long time. I thought about a round table and raised hands and a man counting votes. I thought about a voice saying kids are adaptable, as though my daughter's claim to her own space was a minor logistical inconvenience to be solved by other people's consensus. I thought about Nana Bess in her small house, working 2 jobs, saying the most dangerous thing a woman can do is let other people decide what she deserves. I thought about a fireproof box on the top shelf of a closet. I said, "Lily, that is a beautiful drawing." She said, "I know." And she went back to coloring. I sat at my oak table in my house, which had always been my house, and I drank my coffee. And outside the window, the February light was doing that thing it does in winter where it comes in sideways and makes everything look like it is being gently considered. And I felt for the first time in a long time that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That is the whole story, or the main part of it. What I want to leave you with is not a lesson because I distrust tidy lessons, and I think you're smart enough to take from this what is true for your own life. But I will say this: there are things that belong to you that you should not let language quietly claim. There are silences that accumulate into consent. There are votes that only carry weight if you let them, and there are boxes, sometimes literal ones, sometimes not, that you keep on a high shelf, not because you're planning a war, but because some things are simply yours, and it is important to know what they are. Nana Bess knew she always knew. I put the fireproof box back on the shelf, I closed the closet. I went to be with my daughter, and the house was exactly as it had always been. Mine. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever stayed quiet about something that was yours because you were trying to keep the peace? Have you ever watched someone's family close ranks around them and felt yourself becoming smaller in the room? Tell me what part of Eva's story hit you hardest. Because the vote at the dinner table is the moment everyone remembers. But the real turning point was years earlier, the first time she said nothing when she should have spoken, and the question I keep thinking about is, at what point does patience become permission? Leave your answer below, and if you know someone who is holding too much and saying too little, share this with them. Not as a hint, just as company.